Hello and welcome to this video on why children have a certain degree of greater resilience to some viral infections under some circumstances. This is all the more odd, given children tend to be more vulnerable to respiratory viruses like influenza. Children are a strange area of study in immunology. Initially, they are expected to be protected by maternal antibodies. This can extend for a time during breastfeeding and shortly after birth, but it does begin to decline after birth. This should make children and infants more exposed and vulnerable to viral infections. This is needed to help build the immune system's memory and develop antibodies to pathogens. This makes the infection of children with COVID-19, but with very limited symptoms and an unusually low number, an anomaly. It's estimated that the age bracket with the lowest fatality ratio is 5 to 9 year old children, and in fact they may have the lowest infection rate among any age group. Children and the elderly have something in common with their immune system. That is, in both cases, it is not a strong immune system. Very young children have yet to be exposed to enough pathogens and other material that will train their immune system to recognize what is bad and what is good. This means that they don't respond well to infections or other diseases and undesirable elements. This invariably leads to a delayed immune response, and so they become sick for longer and with more pronounced symptoms. As people get older, the opposite occurs. The immune system dwindles and weakens, and so you get the same result, but with the opposite mechanism. This actually has something of an ironic outcome. The possibility exists that because children's immune system is underdeveloped, that they've not been exposed to novel pathogens and antigens, that it might be one of the big reasons why their body does not have the same severe response to infection that we see even in some adults. This owes to the nature of the antibodies that are generated. Generally speaking, the earliest parts of an infection are dealt with through the innate immune system. These are leukocytes or immune cells that circulate around the body and are there to defend it, but they're not specialized at any one task, such as viral infections. The first stages of that system, called the adaptive immune system, involves releasing antibodies. Antibodies are specific to an antigen, which is the viral marker. Fortunately, the body doesn't have to have an exact initial response. IgG is like lock and key, whereas IgM has more variability and more reactivity, and so it has a broader scope, let's say, and it can respond to more things. If the human body's immune system hasn't been trained yet, its IgM is incredibly varied and very wide-hitting. That means its strike range can be very effective. The younger body is also able to generate a more diverse range of antibodies initially to try and find something that matches. And this antibody broadness is another important factor. Because children are young and they don't have an immune system that has begun to cull unneeded or unwanted areas of the immune system's repertoire of B cells, there is a wider set to choose from, and it can begin to mount antibody production much sooner. This is because they don't have that exposure. Without exposure to common environmental pathogens, they have a big library of possible recipes to call on, and these can generate new antibodies much more easily than someone who has had their library, so to speak, trimmed down to be a more streamlined and efficient system. In a similar vein of thought, the lack of that developed immune system and that repertoire of memory B cells means that children can, in theory, find naive B cells that have not yet been trained to deal with a particular known pathogen or antigen, and they can begin to make antibodies much sooner. rather than having to try and sort through to find ones that have some affinity or similar, they can simply look for B cells that are going to react at all. This means they can more quickly and effectively begin to proliferate and select. It's not all just about the immune system though, especially when we're talking about COVID. There is also a relationship between age and ACE2 receptor production or prevalence. Generally speaking, as you get older, the older you are, the fewer ACE2 receptors you have. As you get much older again, the density of these will decrease. It's noteworthy though that the peak density for ACE2 receptors is as an adult. Children also, similarly to old people, have a lower density of ACE2 receptors. These receptors are the primary means by which the virus will enter your cells and be able to replicate and create more viruses that can then infect more cells until the immune system takes care of it. These receptors are absolutely essential for viral replication. The other factor with them is that they are also involved in activation of the immune system and inflammatory responses. If you don't have the receptor being activated and various other mechanisms taking effect, you don't get the inflammatory response, which is going to help the immune system take action. The inflammatory response also has other effects. Think of things like fever, blood vessel dilation, immune system activity, all sorts of things that let the body deal with an infection. It's also thought that through a slight twist of irony, the ACE2 receptor could also play an important role in being able to enhance the expression of the genes involved in viral replication. Since children and very old people have fewer of these receptors, the children with it are likely to experience lower amounts of viral replication because they have less activity of the receptor. That means when they are infected, they are going to experience a less severe infection because the virus can replicate less effectively in their body. This is also then going to feed into that inflammation process. If the body isn't signaling that there's an infection that needs to be dealt with as seriously, as in the amount of inflammation is lower, you're going to get fewer of those symptoms we mentioned. Things like fever, the inflammation of various tissues and dilation of them, the movement of immune cells and the amount that are generated. All of these things are going to be dampened in children because they have lower ACE2 receptor density. In very broad summary, it's somewhat ironic that as an adult you have been exposed to other coronaviruses in the past. The immune system has developed a memory of these. With this memory, it begins to make antibodies targeted at those coronaviruses first. This makes sense. The immune system has some idea of how to react and what it's reacting to, so it begins some sort of response rather than nothing. Children, on the other hand, given their lack of exposure to coronaviruses, given their age, don't have that particular problem. Because they don't have memory B cells with antibodies and then later other memory cells being rallied, they begin producing a specific, very, very high affinity antibody and other leukocytes targeted at the coronavirus. This means they can get on top of it quicker, and they have a body that's developing in such a way that there is less opportunity for coronaviruses to be able to proliferate within the body. This duopoly of effects means that they are going to experience fewer symptoms and they're going to be less severe. It creates something of an irony in that something that affects adults currently more than any other group affects children because they don't have an immune system that is as developed. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.